Thank you for agreeing to participate and be part of this Justice for All in immigration and voter access. We're very excited to be able to present this session. My name is Susan Lineberger. I am a past president of the League, and it is my pleasure to serve as moderator today. I'd like to introduce to you the panelists for today's presentation on immigration and voter access. On my immediate left is Leigh Chapman, who is currently the Director of Policy, the Assistant Director for the Department of State. Right?
Director of Policy for the Department of State.
Director of Policy for the Department of State. She graduated from the University of Virginia, earning a BA in American Studies and History, and her JD from Howard University School of Law, where she was a member of the Human Rights and Globalization Law Review. Before joining the Department of State, Ms. Chapman was staff attorney at the Advancement Project, a national nonprofit organization where she worked on election administration policy across the country. Ms. Chapman currently serves as chair of the National Bar Association Young Lawyers Division and was co-chair of the National Bar Association Election Protection Committee. In her role as policy director, she manages the Department of State's policy and regulatory development process, coordinating with the Governor's Office of Policy. She provides research, analysis, and recommendations on key departmental issues that impact the program areas of charities, corporations, elections, and professional licensure. Welcome, Leigh.
Thank you for having me.
On Leigh's left is Oscar Barbosa, and Mr. Barbosa founded his firm, Diaspora Law, in order to provide comprehensive immigration services. He is admitted to practice immigration law nationwide and a member of the New Jersey Bar with offices in Pennsylvania, Virginia, Florida, and New Jersey. Mr. Barbosa sees immigration as a human rights-oriented practice. He previously worked with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees as a legal assistant and with the Service Employees International Union as an organizer. His previous academic and work experience have taken him for extended periods to South America, Europe, and East Asia. He is also a member of the American Immigration Lawyers Association and actively assists regional community organizations in immigration matters. He graduated from Syracuse University College of Law, the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs, with an MA in International Relations. He has a BA in Political Science from Penn State. Welcome, Oscar. It's wonderful to see you again.
Thank you.
On Oscar's left is Dr. Nita Bagchi, and Dr. Bagchi is currently an Associate Professor of Government and Political Affairs here at Millersville. She is also the Director of the Women and Gender Studies program. She graduated with a PhD in Political Theory and American Politics from the University of Virginia. She has published a chapter in the edited volume Political Philosophy Comes to Ricks, Casablanca, and American Civic Culture, an extract on Charlotte Perkins Gilman in the forthcoming Cambridge Dictionary of Political Thought. She has written chapters on democracy, federalism, and civil rights in American National Government by Adam Lawrence, as well as providing book reviews in the International Feminist Journal of Politics. Excuse me. She is currently teaching courses on women in politics, the introduction to American government, the introduction to political theory, and her main interests are in the areas of gender studies, the intersection of literature and politics, and ancient political theory. And welcome.
Thank you.
To Dr. Bagchi's left, to Nita's left, excuse me, is Dr. Carrie Smith. And she is an associate professor in the Sociology Anthropology department here at Millersville. Her specialty areas include sex and gender and the sociology of reproduction and birth. Here at Millersville, she teaches courses in medical sociology, sociology of the family, and race and ethnic relations. She serves as a faculty fellow at the Center for Public Scholarship and Social Change here at Millersville. And welcome, Carrie.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We have an illustrious panel here today, and it makes me think, and I know you might be surprised to hear this, that knowing some of these topics, I would love to go back to school. You knowing otherwise, you may try to dissuade me. However, these topics are so important to us today. Emphasis placed on immigration by the media and the candidate's stance on this issue of immigration has resulted in a great increase of civic engagement by the immigrant population in the U.S. Both candidates have different platforms when it comes to immigration issues, such as legalization, refugee resettlement, border control, and even birthright citizenship. Applications by legal permanent residents to naturalize were up 32% this year compared with last year, with several reports citing this election as a significant reason for people to apply for citizenship. Nationwide, the Hispanic population makes up 17% of our population, and Asian Americans make up 6%. In Pennsylvania, immigrants make up 6.3% of the state's population. Evidently, the immigrant vote will definitely be vital in this election year. A recent study done by the Pew Research Center indicates that 70% of the registered voters today feel that immigration is a very important issue, compared with just 4 years ago when only 41% of the population felt that immigration was an important topic. In this contested election year, immigrants are bound to play a key role in the electoral swing state of Pennsylvania. But we must first ensure that everyone can access that right to vote. Across the nation, judges this past summer have struck down voting laws that were determined to have consequences that were discriminatory to certain parts of this population. As fast as protective voter laws are enacted, individual states continue to tear those down and restrict citizens' access to voting places and to voting information. 1/3 of the eligible voters will be racial minorities, making 2016 one of the most racially and ethnically diverse elections in U.S. history. This panel discussion will focus on immigration and voter access and voter rights as it relates to justice for all. Obviously, this topic is very important to the League of Women Voters, who will soon be celebrating our 100th anniversary of the women receiving the franchise. In Lancaster, the League of Women Voters of Lancaster County are getting ready to celebrate their 70th anniversary of their founding, and working with people all across the Commonwealth to make sure that people have the information to vote. We are nonpartisan. We do not endorse candidates, but we provide information so that you, as an individual, can make a decision based on information and not on rumor or who's the cutest candidate, for example. So we have certainly come a long way, but as I indicated earlier, we know that this election is going to be critical for, I think, the health of this democracy in which we live. So I'd like to start with a few questions for our panelists. In your opinion, what is the biggest barrier to voter access for immigrants in our state today? Leigh, do you want to start?
Sure. So first of all, I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me. The Governor, Tom Wolf, and also Secretary of State Pedro Cortez are very dedicated to making sure that everyone has a meaningful opportunity to register and vote. So I know you're all college students. I have to take this opportunity before I get into the subject matter. How many of you are registered to vote? Can you raise your hand? Oh, gosh. Okay. That's wonderful. And how many of you, this will be the first time you're voting in an election? Okay, great. So if you're not sure, if you're one of the people that didn't raise your hand, Pennsylvania just recently rolled out a new text message service. I know everyone has their smartphone. So if you text the word PA to the number 2VOTE, which is 28683, you'll receive a link back. You can click on that link, and you can also register to vote online. You can check your voter registration status. You can find your polling place. It's a really cool tool that you can use. There's also a link to voter education information on there. So please feel free to distribute that information to your fellow classmates. But just back to the issue, the question was, what do I think are the biggest barriers to voting for immigrants? And I think that language access is a huge barrier, as well as voter education. I'm sorry, what's your name? Susan, sorry. So Susan mentioned that I worked at a nonprofit organization before I came to Pennsylvania. And I worked at a nonprofit organization called Advancement Project, which was a civil rights racial justice organization. And in 2012, we were in Florida. And I'm not sure if you heard, but in Florida in 2012, there were really long lines. And Florida actually has early voting, which is something that Pennsylvania doesn't have. Pennsylvania, our election code really hasn't been updated since 1930. So we don't have, absentee voting for everyone. We don't have early voting, a lot of reforms that you see in other states. But we were in Florida in 2012, and we met a woman who was 102 years old. Her name was Dessalene Victor, and she was originally from Haiti. And she went to vote early at one of her polling places in Miami, and she was told to go home because there was no one who could speak Haitian Creole, which was her native language. So she actually went home and came back and stood in line to vote for 3 hours. And how many 102-year-olds would have done that? Like I wouldn't want my grandmother to have to stand in line for 3 hours because there was no one there to translate the ballot for her. I don't think that should be something that should happen to anyone. So we actually told the White House about her story, and she was the president's guest during the State of the Union in 2013, which which was wonderful. But, think of all the people out there that probably wouldn't come back. So language access is a huge barrier for people who are immigrants. Secretary Cortez is very dedicated to improving language access in the state. Under the Federal Voting Rights Act, we're required to have all of our materials in Spanish and in English. So on our website, which is votespa.com, we have our materials in English and in Spanish. The main place that people register to vote in Pennsylvania is PennDOT when you go to get your driver's license. There's a screen and it tells you that you can register to vote. So we actually translated those screens into 12 different languages. And we're hoping to translate the voter registration form, the online voter registration application into those 12 languages as well. But because most of the registrations come through PennDOT, we focused on that first. So that's one of the initiatives that we've done to reduce the barriers for language. I think the second barrier that a lot of immigrants face is voter education. We work with a lot of stakeholders. We're part of a coalition of groups to improve language access in the Commonwealth, and a lot of people say that just going into a polling place can be kind of intimidating. You walk in and there's a panel of people sitting here and they say your name out loud, so that could be a really intimidating thing to do at first. So voter education is crucial. We launched a program called Everyone Votes PA, and Millersville University actually has their own Everyone Votes PA website, which we're really happy about. But the whole purpose behind that is to train people about the nuts and bolts of voting. We want community organizations to go and train people about what to expect at the polling place. Also, so people know their rights at the polling place, in case there's any voter intimidation or something that may occur out of the norm, people know what to do, so they're not disenfranchised. So those are our two main focuses on how to address these barriers.
Thanks, Leigh. Oscar?
Well, one thing is that if you all remember, only citizens can vote, but we have many people in the U.S. who are residents or who have work authorization or are here maybe temporarily in a process to eventually become residents, and only citizens can vote. So one thing that affects immigrants is the fact they can become citizens for one or other reason. That is one of the reasons why the immigration system needs to be improved, so there is an easier path for people that belong here, that's been here for years and has working here and contributes to our community, be able to become citizens and be able to eventually vote. So that's I guess one of the barriers, the immigration system itself. And my colleague mentioned one other thing where the state is behind is the fact that we have to have an excuse to be doing an absentee ballot. We have to tell the government I'm studying abroad or I'm working out of state, I am sick, and then we're allowed to vote by mail. In many other states you don't have to. You can just vote by mail, or you can request an absentee ballot without really having to give an excuse. And they'll be able to voice your vote at that place and at that time. The fact that we don't have absentee ballots and we have to come up with an excuse or travel hours to our state of residency to vote is that people may be elderly, may be sick, and or even immigrants who are not very familiar with our system, people who has just become citizens and they don't know when to register, how to register, where to vote. If they move, they don't know where to update their address. They might not be prepared for the election day, and sometimes the election day is already too late. You have to register 30 days before the election in most states, but if you just kind of are pushing it, thinking that you can just show up and register at the polls, then the lack of information and education is also a barrier. The fact that you can't do an absentee ballot means that you have to plan in advance. What is that you're going to do? How are you going to get to the polls? Are you going to call somebody? Are you going to ask a friend? Are you going to ask a neighbor? So that's an additional barrier, especially if it's November, if it's raining, or if it's snowing already. That's another problem that we can face.
Well, I'm going to tell you a story. This is true. So when I got citizenship, I'd already gotten my PhD in government, right? But the first time I went to vote, I was nervous. And I knew how to vote, trust me, but I being the anal person I am, I kept saying, why don't we have a quiz on voting where I can go and practice, just practice so that I know what I'm doing. And when I got in, one of the things I always do, again, is I always get a paper ballot just because I want a record of my vote. I love technology, but I'm not about to trust it with my vote or solely trust it with my vote. So I always get a paper ballot, fill it out, and then feed it through the machine. But essentially, I want a record of my vote. And so I think you heard some of the problems. Even if you're a fully knowledgeable person, if you are doing this for the first time and you don't feel a little nervous, then you are not aware of the enormity of what you're doing, right? And so I think training people almost to vote is a big deal. But there are lots of other things. Again, voter access laws vary from state to state, so it depends on the state you live in. And there are a lot of states that have different laws. Pennsylvania is kind of, as you heard, pretty outdated. We don't have same-day registration, for instance. Same-day registration is much more small d democratic, right? Small d democratic meaning as a process. Because that means if you forgot to register, you're not shut out of voting. We don't have same-day registration. The voter ID stuff is, as you know, extremely controversial. Now the courts have been kind of striking down voter ID, but there are still states that are dedicated to enacting voter ID laws, which are certainly one more barrier to voting. Early voting should be encouraged. And by the way, more and more minorities of all kinds are actually participating in early voting where it's available. In a lot of states, though, they are cutting access to early voting. And that poses a problem because if your job doesn't give you time off, Pennsylvania does not have a law that requires your job to give you time off to go vote. Some states have a law that says you have to give people time off to vote. But Pennsylvania doesn't have that. And if you don't have that flexibility, it can impact your ability to vote. And so early voting, absentee voting can offset that. We don't have those either, right? So I think there are a lot of structural barriers to voting, not just for minorities or immigrants. I think there are just structural barriers to voting for everyone. And it might behoove us to think about having a structure that basically allows everyone to exercise their most minimal responsibility as an American citizen.
So I'll jump onto that. I'll tell you my immigration story. I am an immigrant to this country. I'm a naturalized citizen of this country. I'm very proud to be a naturalized citizen. When I was sworn in as a citizen, right after the swearing in ceremony, they immediately gave me a voter registration form. And they said, here, fill it out. It was great. I said, I'm tired, I wanted to go home. It's been a long day. It's very emotionally draining. By the way, for those of you in the show who have never experienced a naturalization swearing in ceremony, I highly recommend that you attend one because it is the most uplifting. It will make you have faith in democracy. Again, it's unbelievable. So they had the forms there. I wanted to go home. If it were not for my in-laws and my spouse who was with me, I would have folded up that form and gone home because there was nobody there to explain to us why it was important to fill it out now. There was nobody to explain to us the different parts of the form. And being the contrary person that I am, I did not want to check the box, Republican or Democrat. I said, I'm going to stay an independent. And my mother-in-law, who is the judge of elections, actually, in Lancaster City, said, no, you don't want to do that. Like you, I have a PhD. I should know this stuff, but I don't. I said, why don't you want to do that? She said, because in Pennsylvania, you need to be affiliated with a political party to vote in the primaries. Oh, okay. All right. So I checked one of the boxes. I'm not going to tell you which one. But I think that's a structural barrier. One of the things that my father always likes talking about is how big the United States is. This is a big country with 50 states, and all those states all have different rules. And I get students, you're right, not just immigrant students in my office all the time. I don't understand what the rules are. I don't understand what the deadlines are. And often it requires you to go look it up. California has a different state of laws than Pennsylvania does. which is different from Tennessee. And that would have been really helpful to have that. I think a second issue, some of the panelists here have talked about language issues. I often think of language issues in terms of following candidates and what candidates' stance on issues are, because not every candidate has a website or information out there that is easily understandable in many different languages. You know, I can read English fine, I follow their Facebook feed, but some members of my family might not be able to do that, may not be able to understand what their issues are. And again, we hear this from students all the time, I'm too busy. I don't have time to follow the candidate, so I'm not voting. And my response has always been, if you have time to post a Facebook post today, you have time to add an organization or a candidate on and just watch that feed pop up. It's just not that hard. It's really easy to do. The third thing I want to say about barriers is, I think what Nitsu said. I felt the same way. I was horribly nervous when I went to vote for the first time. And it's not because I didn't know what I was doing. Those of you in this room who are too young to remember, in the 2000 elections, that was an issue in Florida with old people, supposedly, who didn't know how to vote. And there were things called hanging chads. How many of you have heard of that? Oh my God. So in 2000, it was sort of a contested election. And there were all these votes in Florida that reportedly weren't counted because people didn't punch the holes through enough, and there were these hanging chads. So those were all discarded, okay? So Florida comes up a lot.
It's the poster child for
right,
election
poster
fraud.
child. And so when I became ready to vote, I remembered saying, I don't want to be in the newspaper as one of those people who didn't know how to work the machines, and there was a hanging chad, you know, this PhD who didn't know how to vote. And one of the things that really helped me, and I think this should be systematic and structural, like I said, my mother-in-law was the judge of elections in Lancaster City. When she went to set up the ballot, the polls, I went with her. And I set it up with her, and she said, okay, I want you to know this is how the process, and she walked me through it. This is where you will stand, this is where the form will be, and that helped tremendously. And I think if we have a system like this, where we walk people through the system, this is what it's going to look like. Did you all know that you can get a sample ballot and find it online? People are shaking their heads. You can get a sample ballot for your district, what that form will look like before you go vote. And that is what I do every single time. I pull up a sample ballot, I take a look, here's what I'm gonna do, here are the boxes I'm gonna check, because it makes me feel more prepared to know that this is a sample ballot. And I think if we make that information, if there are links, here's what your sample ballot looks like for your district. And one last thing I wanna say, I came from a country where we do not vote on Tuesday. We vote on a weekend day when people are not working the whole day. I find it incredible that in this country we vote on a Tuesday, where for most people it is the middle of the work week. For a long time I did not teach on Tuesdays. I never thought this was a problem. Right now I'm teaching Tuesday, Thursdays. My day starts at 8, it doesn't end till 5. I have to remember to go vote. And I think this puts a tremendous structural barrier in a lot of people's way. And there are people who have suggested, why don't we make voting day just a federal holiday, and everybody takes off work and you actually can go vote. But this is a huge issue. And I always come to class and say to students, did you go vote yet? And students go, no. And then, are you gonna go after this? No, I have to work till 8. We have to find some way to accommodate that, and I think changing that, moving that from Tuesday is absolutely, I mean, it's easy to remember, right, second Tuesday, you know, but it is an awful, awful day to vote.
I wanted to mention one thing. You commented on Florida in 2000.
Yeah.
You know, that election was decided by 500 votes.
Mm-hmm.
The entire country, you know, the president was decided by 500 votes. So I always say, when people believe, oh, my vote doesn't count, look at Florida in 2000. So that's just something to flag when you have a friend that says, I'm not going to vote because my vote doesn't count. Yes, it does.
I'm just one person.
Right.
Yeah.
And remember, we live in a swing state. Certainly swing this year, so
Right.
vote.
We'll swing.
Thank you.
Yes.
We'll swing the right direction.
Let's start with Oscar this time, and was the last time immigration laws were changed or reformed? Have there been policies in place since that have affected the issue of immigration, whether positively or negatively?
Well, immigration laws change all the time. Almost every year we have something new, and it's maybe something small about a waiver, something small about a visa for an investor. But the last time there was a comprehensive, long process that really changed immigration law was in the 80s. It did require, similar to the proposal that was pushed through 2013 that got nowhere, it required people to be here for a certain period of time, to have paid taxes, to have family members in here, and required them, if they came undocumented, go back to their country, go to an interview, and then come back to the U.S. And that was, people called it the Reagan's amnesty. It's very different to the processes that are trying to do right now, but it did allow for many people that was here undocumented to obtain work authorization and become residents and eventually become citizens. Since then, nothing has been done, and we're talking of over 20 years of waiting, over 30 years of waiting. The proposal in 2013 mandated similar things, wanted to improve the process in which USCIS functioned, to have enough visas for everybody that wanted to come in, wanted to invest a lot of money in the border, because I guess we need border security. Terrorists are coming through the border and everybody's scared from the border. So this 2013 proposal demanded a lot of money to be given to the border states in Texas, Arizona, and California to make sure that they had what they needed. In addition to that, it gave a process for 11 plus million undocumented here to get registered with the government. Right now, we don't know who they are, where they are, what they do, if they're paying taxes or not. But this proposal allows people to go forward, register with the government. They have to go through fingerprinting, go through biometrics, where the government will check whether or not you have a criminal record, and eventually have a work authorization for a couple of years before you can become a resident, and eventually a path to citizenship, which is one of the tricky issues. As I mentioned, only citizens can vote. And in the immigration discussions is whether or not you want the people that's living here to become citizens or not. If they can become citizens, what are they going to be? Are they just going to be residents forever? Are they going to have a temporal protected status forever? And we're talking about millions of people from multiple countries that will never be able to be fully citizens and fully participant of our economy. Or would it be a status that can be terminated when the next president comes in? So those were some of the issues that the Senate approved. The House never brought to the floor and never got to the president to be approved as a law. Right now we're having two opposites arguing different options for immigration. Clinton is pushing that 2013 proposal, and Trump is pushing the total opposite. Not only deporting the undocumented, but also sending away their family members who might be residents and might be citizens. So unfortunately, it's hard to tell where are things going because of the partisanship in the discussion, because there is no agreement in Congress. And the fact of the matter is that every time a law comes in to limit voters, like this ID voter registration, there was a time that you had to swear in that you were registered with a party and be of certain race to be able to vote. Or if you had to be a male to be able to vote too. So every time something happens, they're trying to restrict certain populations, and that's portion of the discussion. Do we want this population to vote? Do we want them to participate? And it's hard to predict how soon could this change to make sure that everybody participates.
I think the other thing to remember too is that there's law and then there's executive order, and in our case, again, we haven't had a major change in law because fundamentally there's a discussion about whether you want what we call comprehensive immigration reform, or simply secure parts of immigration first and then move on to other things. So do we secure the border, then talk about immigration, or do we start with comprehensive immigration reform? So that's a discussion in and of itself. In 2012, the other question has been about what is the so-called DREAM Act, right? The DREAM Act was this idea that children that came into the country at a very young age, they were minors when they were brought to the country by their parents and they have not committed any crimes, they've been essentially brought up in the US, do you grant them some kind of legal status and or citizenship, right? The DREAM Act didn't go anywhere, but President Obama did, through just executive action, decide to grant them legal status. And then later, in 2014, he kind of pushed for legal status for parents of children that have been born in the United States as a extension of the don't separate families rule that we have for immigration. But what's happened is, because the Supreme Court talk about being complicated, our Supreme Court is now at 8 instead of 9. The Congress refuses, or I should say the Senate refuses to confirm the 9th appointee. And so effectively, because we have a 8-person Supreme Court, the last decision that they were going to give was on immigration. And in June, they split 4-4 on the decision, which means that nothing happened. And so basically, we are back to the non-enforcement of the 2014 regulations. And we just either have to wait for a law to pass or for a 9th justice on the Supreme Court, and then have some resolution to immigration at that point.
So yeah, I'm a sociologist. I come at this a little bit differently. One thing I think we all need to understand is the long history of immigration policies and laws in this country, and that there have been different impacts each time a different law has been passed. Because of my ethnic heritage background, I always like to mention the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act. There was a time in this country when we didn't want anybody of Chinese ancestry coming to this country because they were taking jobs away from people. And in fact, if you were of Asian heritage, you could not become a citizen of the United States. I want to say until 1952, but please do not quote me on that, right? And then there's the 1924 National Origins Act, where we were quite deliberate about who and what types of people we wanted in this country. And so it's kind of amusing to me when I see politicians go, let's do this, let's build a wall. And I go, well, yeah, that's similar to something we tried this many years ago, and this was the result we had. Do we really want to go back? And I always wish moderators on debates and things like that would always ask, so what was the result? We tried this. What were the results of this when we last tried this? In terms of changes, I think there's a really major one, because I sort of went through immigration right after this change. Post 9/11, immigration no longer stood alone. Immigration was now part of Homeland Security. And that was a huge change. The bureaucracy was different. Once it got folded under Homeland Security for understandable reasons, what the concerns are, that was a very different way of seeing immigration, that this was a safety issue, okay? The second thing that is different, I think, about immigration is this concern with fraud. That people are going, this is a very American concern. I didn't grow up in this country, so it's really interesting. People are going to lie about something to become immigrants in this country. I, for instance, had to go through 2 fraud interviews to certify that and this is exact immigration language, my marriage was not entered into for the purposes of fraud. I had to go to an interview to ascertain that this was a real marriage. I know this is being taped, but I'll tell the story. So they sent a letter, and when immigration sends you a letter, I don't think many people in this room are aware of it. When immigration sends you a letter, they give you a date, like next week on Wednesday at this time, show up. If you can't make it, call us, but it means you'll be pushed back to the log. So second, third year I was here, I think, they sent me a letter. I thought, oh my God, I teach social research methods that day. I'm gonna have to cancel class. So one of my colleagues said, what do they want to talk to you for? I said, they want to ascertain that my marriage was not entered into for the purposes of fraud. Again, I know this is being taped. One of my colleagues said, how do you prove that? Do you just go in and have sex? And my other colleague, who's no longer here, said, that don't prove anything, that just proves she's easy. But I want you to think about the embarrassment and the humiliation of that process, of taking a train down to Philadelphia with our wedding books, with all this stuff, with bills, with all these ways, letters from people who know us and who can ascertain that we are a real couple. That was quite strange to have to explain to people, well, you write these letters. And I think our whole mentality, and now I think about the discussion over Syrian refugees, is not one of human rights or dignity. It is one of, let's prepare in case of fraud. And I think that's a very strange system to have, and it doesn't really preserve people's dignity in terms of now I can joke about it, but at that time it was really quite traumatic to actually go through that. And the other thing that we've been talking about in this country for a long time, other countries have changed this, we haven't, is the focus of the citizenship exam. In this country, when you take a citizenship exam, you have to document a knowledge of American government, American civics, and American history, because that's the idea of American citizenship,
And
right?
geography now,
And
too.
geography now, too. And you also have to, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, demonstrate that you can read a sentence in English. I think my sentence was, California is the most populous state. Then they make you write it to document that you can write in English. I, of course, laughed hysterically. And then you have to stop because you don't mess with immigration. You just don't. But other countries have since changed their citizenship focus, and this has been a long discussion in this country. How do we define who qualifies as a citizen? And this pops up now and then. Great Britain recently changed theirs. There are now questions on popular culture in Great Britain. Denmark recently changed theirs, and theirs is very difficult now. And it is quite clear that there were political parties in Denmark who changed it to prevent more people from becoming Danish citizens. Some of the questions were impossible, and I'm making these up, but they're in the same kind of area. Like, who won the latest Denmark Has Talent? Things like that, to make sure that, so there's a difference, right, between how we think of citizenship. Are you a citizen because you adhere to American civics, what being an American means? Are you a citizen because you are aware of popular culture in this nation? Are you a citizen because you can name what the minimum wage is in your state? Those are interesting questions to ask, but like I said, I look at it from a bigger, how do we approach immigration from a big picture issue? And there are just a lot of questions to ask.
It is an interesting question to ask. What makes you a citizen?
Citizen.
I mean, in the sense, obviously, in the United States, we just think of people born in the United States as citizens. But if you're naturalizing someone, what makes you a citizen? In some ways, I mean, if they had asked me a popular culture question, I would have said, sorry, I'm walking out right now. I don't watch movies. I have no idea what Denmark, the United States Have Talent is, or whatever, if they have that show. But essentially, but here's the thing. The weird thing is, though, that naturalized citizens in the United States often know more about American history, geography, and politics than American citizens because of the nature of the citizenship exam, right? On the other hand, I would say the questions they ask you to read in English or write in English are extremely basic, extremely, extremely basic. For me, the question was, who is the president? And I still remember I answered it because I thought she was asking me the question, but she was asking me to read the question. And so in some ways, being fluent in the language is not really their focus. However, being fluent in history, geography, politics is, which weirdly enough, most natural-born citizens of the United States are not, right?
Leigh, do you want to pick it up from there?
No, I think that's fine.
I will add one thing. I'm sorry, I'm very chatty. I will add one thing, and this is something I think a lot of natural-born citizens, right, citizens born here don't understand, is how expensive to go through this process is. I went through this process on my own without hiring an attorney. It cost us about $2,500. This is an extremely expensive process, and not many people have the financial resources to go through this process. I was very fortunate when I went through this process. I was living in Nashville, and there was an office in Memphis, and we would drive back and forth to Memphis. because we didn't really trust a whole stack of documents to the mail. We wanted an actual case number, right? But it is a horrifically expensive process. Things cost, and when I went through the process, they had just jacked up the prices for application fees, and it was a huge difference. And when I tell Americans, I'm really sorry I don't have the exact numbers with me right now, but when I tell people how much this costs, people are stunned. This is how much it costs? Yes, and to fill out all this paperwork and to remember all this information, it's not easy. And when I do teach race and ethnic relations, I give students the citizenship test. At Millersville, the success rate has not been very high. Many people have had to start looking for a different country for citizenship, because in a class of about 40, maybe one passes.
Actually, I am going to add one thing.
Go for it.
I think one thing that we haven't talked about is, with voting and civic engagement, it's all about political power.
Yeah.
And that's important to tie into citizenship, because I think, as Oscar alluded to, in the 1800s, only white male property owners could vote.
Mhm.
And then it was expanded a little bit. After some African Americans could vote, and then women could vote, and then, power changes, and then all of a sudden we had all these poll taxes and literacy tests in the South to prevent, people of color from voting. So, your vote counts. It's interesting, in 2013 and before that, when we were seeing all these voter ID laws, cuts to early voting, cuts to same-day registration that you mentioned, it's because some people in power don't want a certain demographic of people to vote. And our country is changing the way things are looking. In Pennsylvania, it's changing. So just think, when people are saying your vote doesn't count, if people are putting all this effort and all this money into passing legislation to make it harder for certain segments of the population to vote, of course it does count. In my previous position, I litigated the Wisconsin voter ID case, which is actually still going on. And I'm sure a lot of you know about migratory patterns and the Great Migration, and the migration from the South to the North that a lot of African Americans went through. But I had a witness in that case. She was born in Mississippi, and her family migrated to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And the Wisconsin voter ID law said you had to have a birth certificate in order to get an ID to vote. And she was born at home to a midwife, was never issued a birth certificate. There was no way of her getting one because she was like 90-something years old. And she had actually voted in every election since like the 1920s, but she couldn't, because she couldn't get a birth certificate to get an ID to vote. So I say all that to say there's a long history with political power and becoming a citizen and your right to vote. And it's important to kind of connect the dots, because I think that we should have 100% citizen participation. The governor wants 100% citizen participation. The secretary does as well. If it was up to us, everybody could vote. But there are powers in this country that don't want to see that happen.
One of the topics that we have not touched on today, I was hoping that Oscar might help us with, and that is the definition of a sanctuary city.
Well, a sanctuary city, it really depends who you ask. There is no legal definition of a sanctuary city, but to be brief, it's a place where immigrants can feel safe, where immigrants are not going to be persecuted or charged or referred to immigration. Unfortunately, there are towns, Hazleton, not too far from here, had a law saying that you could not do business with people without documents. You could not rent a room to somebody without documents. You have to confirm they were all residents and documented to be able to live in the city. The mayor is a representative now somehow, but that was unconstitutional. You can't force people to show whether or not they're documented or not, and deprive them from living in the city or conducting business in the city, for working there. That would be the total opposite from a sanctuary city, a city that's being actively looking for people without documents. And usually they would racially profile, because if you kind of look not local, then maybe you're undocumented, and that raises eyebrows in the police department, and it costs money because they have to stop you, frisk you, ask you for an ID, and that's taxpayer money. So a town that's choosing to persecute the immigrants is not a sanctuary city. On the opposite side of the spectrum, it will be a place where the town knows that they don't need to waste their money persecuting immigrants that are not causing any harm to anybody. There are a few cities, Perth and Boy, New Jersey is the first one that comes to mind, where a Latina mayor decided to use her funds and the limited money in that small town to help their small community, as opposed to making the police persecute immigrants. A sanctuary city would be one where you can freely walk. If you commit maybe an offense, maybe you were involved in a fight, maybe you were a victim of domestic violence, maybe you call the cops to help you, and the cops arrive, they're gonna make a report, we're gonna go to court, testify without ever involving immigration. Other towns are not like that. The whole state of Georgia decided to make sure police ask for the status of an immigrant, whether or not they call as a victim. Hey, they robbed my car, come over and help me. And they will come in and ask me for my residency or my US passport to show I'm legal. And if I couldn't show, even if I was a victim, they could arrest me and call immigration to get me picked up. So some other towns might not have a formal declaration saying we are a sanctuary city and we are happy to have immigrants and have diversity here. We're not going to waste our police money into persecuting this group of people. And Lancaster, for example, Lancaster doesn't have a formal policy saying who can be here, who cannot be here. But if you are involved with the police, they're not going to bother you with your status. What's the most important point here is that immigration is federal law. Immigration has to be regulated by the feds, by the government. That's why the Department of Homeland Security is in charge of that, either bringing you in or getting you out. And the state and the cities have their local funds that should not be used for that. Like as a taxpayer in the county of Lancaster, I don't want the local police or the local sheriff's office looking for undocumented people that's not doing any harm to anybody. So that would be what a sanctuary city is, so a place where people can be safe. The discussion is always about security. It's like, oh, I don't know who they are. I want everybody to be frisked and ask for their ID because they might rob, they might harm. But the truth is, immigrants are not really committing these crimes. Most of the terrorist attacks have been by people with visas that came through the process the way it exists right now. None of them came through the border. So it's, depending who you ask, they might say it's a place where we are safe or a place where we are not safe.
Thank you. Before we turn this over to questions, I had wanted to thank Carrie Hussein and Audrey Lopez right here, who are board members of the League of Women Voters, who actually took the time and trouble to put this panel together and provide this opportunity of information for you. Both of these women are experts in the area of immigration and immigration law. And it is a privilege for us in the League to be able to have that help and that expertise. If you are voting for the very first time, you will have to show ID. That is a reminder to you that although the general voter ID was struck down in Pennsylvania, the previous law is still intact, and that is that if you vote for the very first time, you have to have a picture ID.
And
Just-
student ID will work.
Yes.
Student ID will work.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to remind you also that the League is holding a candidate night for all of the local legislators whom you are going to be voting for on November 8th. And that will be at HAC out on the Old Philadelphia Pike on October 20th at 7 o'clock. One of the key things is if you're going to be voting, when you are going to be voting, you have some information. And if you have the opportunity to talk with the candidates, you can discern from their responses what their priorities are. And you then decide if your feelings coincide with their priorities. Because theoretically, that person is going to be representing you in Harrisburg. I would suggest that we all need to look at people who listen to the suggestions of the people whom they have been elected to represent. Also, the fastest way to vote is to take a paper ballot. A lot of it is using the computer, but most of that is reserved for those who have a handicap in some way. So the fastest system is to go through, give your name, and then sign the book, pick up a ballot, go to a booth where you can fill out the ballot as you wish, come back, stick it through, and take your tab. As some of our skeptics, rightfully so, take your receipt so that you know that you have voted. So we're open for questions at this point on voter access and immigration.
Go forth.
Do you have any questions?
Don't be
Or do you
shy.
have any additional comments that you would like to
I
make?
actually do have a comment.
All right,
Just,
Nita,
just so
take it
you
away.
remember, in Pennsylvania, any concerned citizen can challenge you when you go to vote. I just want to, it's true, and so I just wanted to point it out. But so one of the things that the League of Women Voters does, which I love, is they have your voting rights on their website. Don't leave without filing a provisional ballot if that happens to you. Always, always, always file a provisional ballot. I'm just throwing this out there. I mean, because it's unlikely, but because it is a law, it is not impossible.
Yeah, and your
So-
vote can only be challenged as to identity or
Identity.
residency. So that's like you're not the person who you say you are, or you don't live where you live. And the only people that can challenge you are people inside the polling place. So other voters, the judge of elections, poll watchers, they can challenge you. If you are challenged, you can bring someone to vouch for you. So you can bring your friend and say, this person is Leigh Chapman,
exactly.
and you just have to sign a form and you can vote a regular ballot. But that's something that we are trying to get out there and educate more people on, because it is part of the law. So.
Yeah.
But it doesn't happen that often.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Another important point is to know where you are supposed to vote. Election places sometimes change, and they do post it, but sometimes, well, you know, I show up in a place where I voted last year and they're not there anymore. So it's easy for me to check where I can vote, because I can just go online to PA.
You can text PA to the number to vote, and you can check your polling place.
Or,
Yeah. Or you can go
I
on
go online.
votespa.com.
Or vote 411,
Yeah.
and I just put in my address, and it immediately shows up where I'm supposed to go. So if your time is
Well,
precious,
now you live in a different.
it's good to be prepared. Any other comments, questions?
Could you repeat the number again that they can text?
Sure, you text the word PA, like for Pennsylvania, PA, to the number 2 vote, which is the number 2 and the words vote. So that's the number 28683.
28683. Yes, ma'am.
I'm registered to vote in my home in Maryland, so I won't be able to get there on that day. Should I do an absentee ballot then probably, or I can choose
You
my
could
own?
either, so the voter registration deadline is Tuesday, October 11th.
Okay.
So if you want to vote in Pennsylvania, you can change your registration and actually vote in Pennsylvania. Or if you want to still vote in Maryland, you can request an absentee ballot for Maryland.
Okay.
But you need to do that soon.
Yes,
Okay.
soon. And we will have voter registration forms this evening outside of the kindergarten lecture.
If I register then in Pennsylvania, do I, like, for the next election, then I'll have to re-register in Maryland?
If you're back in Maryland
Mhm.
and you want to
Yeah.
vote there, you, yes.
Just so you know, the government department has a Facebook page, and I already put everything about absentee ballots on there if you wanted to go look at it. They have a website, and it's very easy.
It's not as hard a process as people think it is. You just have to get some ducks in a row, that's all.
The other thing to say is, everyone here is registered to vote. Do you intend to vote? That is the question. It is the greatest gift that we have. It is our voice to those who represent us. So let your voice be heard. And as our panelists have said today, there is nothing more important than your vote. I'd like to thank all of our panelists, and I'd like to thank you for your wonderful time